let's take a quick poll. Who here regularly checks the news because they want to be an informed global citizen, by show of hands? Okay, so most of us want to be globally informed citizens. Being informed makes you sound more interesting at dinner parties. It can be seen as a sign of intelligence or status. And frankly, who doesn't want to connect with their fellow human beings around the world? However, how informed are we really? Who here feels informed enough about, say, Trump's travel ban to at least mention it passingly in conversation? Okay. How about the recent political turmoil in Gambia? The ethnic cleansing in Myanmar? The drug war in the Philippines? Barely anyone. So obviously we're not informed as we think we are, but it's not our fault. The media hasn't made it easy for anyone to access quality international news. But how come in the modern age, when the sharing of information is supposed to be at its height, getting quality news is harder to do than it was in the 1950s? According to Professor Jeffrey Cohen, in the 1950s, there were 3 main channels one got their news from: ABC, CBS, and NBC. Each of these channels delivered the same news every night, so whether you liked it or not, you were watching the news at that time. This setup, though certainly not a utopia, was mostly beneficial for all, and developments in the Cold and Korean Wars were able to stay fresh in everyone's mind. However, with the 1980s came the rise of cable television, meaning that one could watch many things other than news during prime time. This changes news outlets because now they have to compete for your attention. How do they do this? They provide less hard news and more filler, less large-scale events and more clickbait. In the 1990s, instead of covering developments in the Belfast Agreement or the collapse of Yugoslavia, the news media found itself preoccupied with clickbait stories such as the Monica Lewinsky scandal and the O.J. Simpson trials. In the modern day, instead of covering an Iraqi army's attack on the ISIS-held city of Mosul, the news finds itself preoccupied with the Kardashians' wedding. The graph above shows data in a paper by Professor Cohen showing the average percentage of news deemed hard news over time. As you can see, ABC used to have nearly 72% hard news in its reportings. The average has fallen to 48%, less than half. NBC has fallen to under 40%. So what is being covered instead? Personal health, celebrity crime, sports, and entertainment. Also, please keep in mind that the little hard news these outlets are providing most likely aren't the most important headlines, but the headlines designed to make you click. For example, on a given half-hour news show, one might receive a barrage of stories about the latest superfood, a weather forecast, a sports update, and for the outlet's little hard news, a story on Donald Trump's Twitter feed. The outlet may completely neglect a pertinent story, as what happened in December of last year. I don't know if many of y'all realized, but Gambia's president of 22 years refused to step down from public office after he lost his first presidential election last December, and it was looking like it would escalate into a West African military conflict. We weren't hearing about this because the news was instead reporting on a theory that Russia had hacked the US presidential election. Now, whether or not that story is true, it's a pretty clickbaity story. The rise of the internet also means that anyone can become a journalist, meaning that many of the people you get your news from haven't taken a single course in journalistic ethics. This can lead to the rise of fake news and some questionable news stories coming out of seemingly well-respected outlets, such as what many people will know as the BuzzFeed dossier, when BuzzFeed News, a relatively respected news outlet among young people such as myself, published a completely unverified dossier alleging that Trump had certain inappropriate ties to Russia. Algorithms used by Facebook and Google only work to spread these stories around further, keep the real news hidden under lines of code. So I was born into this crazy world with internet and cable television, but as I got into high school, I decided I really wanted to know what was going on in the world around me. You have to understand, I made this commitment in the thick of the 2016 presidential election, when the media was more preoccupied with the fact that Eric Trump put lemonade in a water cup than the siege of Aleppo. But I felt that if I tried hard enough, I could do it. So the first thing I did was I turned on NPR. I thought that this has to work if I listened to it often enough, but I found that I was hearing only one side of every story, if I heard every story at all. Which leads me to my first point. In order to be a globally informed citizen, you have to read from a wide variety of news outlets. That's right, you have to read. a half-hour news show likely is not going to provide you with sufficient information. If you want to hear about international news, most outlets have it, it's just not on their homepage. There are many jumping-off points for which you can get your news, many US-based ones, such as CNN and ABC, also international ones, such as BBC and Al Jazeera. So if we tried this strategy of reading from many news outlets together right now, for example, I'm on NPR's website, but I won't be listening like I used to. I'm going to be browsing. So I'm going to go to this news icon world, and we're going to see what's going on in Asia recently. Okay. So obviously this is a controversial priest. I'm not sure exactly why they're calling him a bigot. It doesn't really say, but I'm going to look on CNN right now. So it looks like, according to this, this priest has been elected to run India's province, and he is a Hindu nationalist. And just stepping back, nationalism has been rising in Europe and North America, and it looks like it has now been rising in Asia additionally. So that took about 30 seconds. And that was probably more satiating than an average half-hour news show. And this is honestly what reading the news should be. It shouldn't be listening to someone else tell you what's going on like a zombie. It should be searching for the correct information over many sources. It's just as if you're trying to eat a healthier diet. One cannot survive off of kale alone, the same way one cannot survive off of Fox News alone. One cannot survive off of CNN alone, the same way one cannot survive off of peanut butter alone. I realize that this is hard to do, as many news outlets try to convince you that certain types of people view certain news sources, and they never look at both. However, this is simply a ploy to increase customer loyalty. Regardless, in a healthy diet, it is always important to treat yourself. Political satire is actually a great way to become informed on the news, as it is a great jumping-off point to see what the big headlines are, and it tends to make fun of both ends of the political spectrum, meaning that you can remain skeptical of both political extremes. In addition, if you Google any inside jokes that you don't get, it only makes you more informed. Regardless, in a healthy diet, there are some things that you should never, ever, ever, ever eat, such as trans fats and rat poison, Facebook news feeds, and fake news. So we've all heard about the rise of fake news, and the cause is seemingly related. So humans are not choosing what goes in your Facebook news feed. Algorithms are. And those algorithms are not looking for stories that are particularly valid, but those with the most likes, comments, and shares. So essentially, it's a breeding ground for clickbait. Now, even if you never looked at Facebook news again, you'd still probably run into some fake news stories. So you can use some strategies, such as if it uses sensational language, excessive all caps, excessive punctuation. You can check the source to see if it's well-known or not. So if we try this together again, so we're going to have some baby steps. And so obviously, shocking is in all caps. That's pretty kind of trying to really win. It's published by ETF News. A quick Google search reveals the first 4 websites are about that site being fake news. Team fake news. So yes, we need a healthy diet of news. We also need to make sure that this news is on both ends of the political spectrum. Now, I'm not saying that we all run over to Drudge Report or BuzzFeed and have those be our 2 sources of news, because that would be a really sad world. However, just be conscious, regardless of your political spectrum. If you were just in the car listening to NPR for an hour, maybe it's safe to turn on Fox. If you were just listening to Fox the past 3 days, maybe you can switch back to NBC. This is especially pertinent to do if there's a news story out there that makes you feel mad or scared. And now, by mad or scared, I don't mean sad for suffering people. That's human empathy, and frankly, that's an amazing outcome of watching the news. However, if you feel so mad that you want to punch a politician, or so scared that you think the world is going to end, then you're most likely viewing a more extreme news outlet, and maybe switching to a less extreme one will help. Maybe the wording in which they report the event will calm you down. One example of this, I punched into 2 very different news sites, Westminster attacker. And these are the 2 main headlines regarding this attacker. And so, depending on your education, how you were raised, and your background, one of these headlines may alarm you a lot more than the other. Another good example of this would be if you're watching Fox News during Obama's inauguration in 2008. Obama was a Democrat, Fox News has a conservative tilt, so naturally they'd be listing all these awful things on Obama's agenda. However, if you switch to, say, NBC for a while, you might feel less angry about all these awful things in Obama's agenda and more happy that our country had made such tremendous progress in electing its first African-American president. If you must look at commentary, then so be it, but I highly recommend it being bipartisan. One of the sites I like to get my commentary from is another form of political satire in the form of editorial cartoons. And this site, the Association of American Editorial Cartoonists, published every cartoon made that day regardless of its political spectrum. And it's really interesting because you'll see recent stories such as the recent allegations that Obama wiretapped Trump's phone, and you're going to see views from the left saying that Trump is crazy, and views from the right saying that Obama is guilty as charged. And it's really interesting to look at because I started my journey to become more informed from the news, trying to connect with people internationally. But I had neglected to connect with people on my own block who had different views than me. And it was an extremely rewarding experience because just because someone has a different political view than you, it doesn't mean they're not human. Some of my favorite stories to ask my elders are where they were when certain big historical events happened. And they know the big ticket events, but I'm always surprised by how much more international events they know. For example, my grandma knows when the paperboy told her that Hitler had invaded Poland in 1939. My neighbor remembers nearly every battle of the Vietnam War. When I ask my grandpa what people thought about Ronald Reagan, he remembers what people both liked and didn't like about him. And so I'd like to leave you with a final request. When your grandchildren ask you where you were when the Syrian civil war came to a close, know the answer. When your children ask you where you were when the British left the European Union, know what people both liked and didn't like about Brexit. And most importantly, when people ask you how you're able to remember so many events, remember how you did it. Thank you.